Yeah, I was holding on to my buns.
I'm like, thank God I picked this section. This is one I can sink my teeth into. I'm
Yes.
like, tell her, tell her, tell her. They took no tea for the fever. I'm like, okay, girl. If she could have jumped
Yeah.
through that letter and snatched and look, I took the time to actually look up Mary Daly, okay, and try to read that gynecology piece she wrote. And then I'm like, okay, I can't read this mess. And so I looked for a video. I know that's terrible, right? I looked for a video of her discussing it, and I'm like, ooh, I feel right now what the problem is that she enjoyed her listening to her own voice. I mean,
Uh-huh.
it was, look at how smart and funny I can be, but at the expense of the rest of the people in the movement. Okay, so yeah, that's what I felt
Well,
about Mary
I
Daly.
didn't
Yeah.
look for her book, um,
Mm-hmm.
but I did look for her picture. You know, like I was telling you guys, I had found pictures for most of the contributors. So I was like, I
Mm-hmm.
gotta see what this Mary Daly looks like. And I found a picture, which was a part of an article talking about how Alexis DeVoe. So, okay, Audre wrote the letter, I think it was June of 1979. And then apparently there was this conference in, and in the letter, she's asking Mary to respond. And then there was a conference in September of 79 where apparently the two women interacted. 2 years later, 1981, Audre has this open letter posted as a part of this bridge. And after that, she included it in her own book, Sister Outsider. So Alexis DeVoe, I think it was in 2003, was doing research in Audre Lorde's papers and came across this letter, this response from Mary Daly that Audre Lorde had in fact received in 1979. And so, you know, scholars started speculating about, well, why would Audre keep saying she never got a response? And, DeVoe shared the letter with Mary Daly, and then Mary Daly started getting it out to all of her people. And so I was just kind of doing my own speculation. And they shared the letter that Mary Daly wrote, and it's not really a response to the specific questions and concerns that Lorde was raising. It's kind of a, you know, I didn't really know, and maybe we could do lunch. So I think that Lorde probably said, well, you know, it wasn't really a response. And so therefore, I'm going to publish the open. So there's some dish there.
Yeah. Exactly. Because I looked when I was looking up Mary Daly's book. It was on Amazon, and then somebody posted in the reviews Audre Lorde's open letter, and then somebody responded to that with Mary Daly's letter, and so I read Mary Daly's letter. I'm like, because the person was like putting it down like boom, Mary did respond, and then I read Mary's response, and I'm like, this is some weak ass. Okay, I hear what you're saying, but I don't really care. Kind of
Yeah,
verbiage, okay?
yes, yes.
If you really felt the other person's or empathize with the other person's anguish or feeling excluded, or offended, the first thing out of your mouth would be, okay, Audrey, because apparently they'd met and talked to each other before, right? They'd
Right.
exchanged books.
Right.
I hear what you're saying, and I'm so sorry if you feel offended by my wording, or feel that I omitted something or used the only African voice was in it was the prequel to mutilate genital mutilation, and that's
Right.
where I left it. I'm
Right.
sorry, but let's collaborate on something, which she did say, let's collaborate, but it was after saying, I don't really care what you think. I don't care
Right.
about your feelings. In other words,
Right.
in that nice speak, you know how we can do that nice intellectualized speak.
Right. 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 You couldn't really dignify it as a response.
So what was Audrey doing? Come back and say, fuck you, bitch? Or what?
Right.
What? Okay, you're going to have to bleep that out.
You're making me work too hard, Gio.
I'm sorry. No more.
This is the way that Moscovich is kind of centering this. What do we do when we stop the niceties, when we stop playing around with this thing, and if we are not doing that work, how do we disrupt these kinds of, oppressions and enclosures? They're embedded and sometimes it's the covert, um, those issues and ways of being with each other that are just as oppressive, right? Even in our so-called circles of solidarity and those alliances that we're so-called building. And so I think that this is like, I was, as I was reading it, I was like, well, this is, hello, call out culture, right? We've talked about, call out culture, whether it makes sense or not, but like it's saying, yeah, we can't keep playing around or being nice or polite, shall I say, around this thing. We've got to like really engage it and deal with it. Um, and so, and to disrupt it, it's not going to be disrupted if we don't deal with it, I think, head on.
Very good.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of a double-edged sword to me, Nicole. So 1981, I was 21. Um, and so this is the kind of stuff that was going on in my young womanhood. I graduated from college at 22, so I'm still in college when this book is published. And Ronald Reagan had been elected in 1980. Um, and it was really kind of the start of a very reactionary period in American politics and history. Um, and so the gains of the civil rights had been achieved, um, and we were starting to really experience the backlash toward all of that, just as we are now living in the backlash of the election of a Black president. This is the pattern. So when Kim talks about playing chess, and recognizing the game, this is the pattern. And it's one of my concerns about the current, um, protest, whatever movement this is afoot right now. Congress came out with the House came out with some legislation yesterday. I was just listening to some historians talk about it, and they were saying that there's some language in there that there's something like, I don't know, 200 some number of bills related to Black people and police brutality have come up over the years in Congress. And there's some language around lynching in yesterday's bill that was proposed in 1921. But they feel like maybe now they can get it through. So I think all kinds of things have been tried, Nicole, in terms of playing nice and playing nasty. But I feel like it's a double-edged sword in the sense of, if you really want people to hear you, if you really want them to understand, then ripping them a new asshole, it just usually doesn't work. It just doesn't work. It feels good. It sure feels good.
Audre Lorde was just gangster like that. So
Yeah.
I know. More expletives.
place for that, right? And sometimes, it takes that. If nothing else, sometimes I just need to see where folks' politics are, these so-called the bystanders. So sometimes there's a standoff. Let's say Mary Daly and Audre Lorde. And then you have the ones who are going to be physically supportive and stand by, Daly's side or Lord's side. And then, the ones who are going to do the private, gestures to say, well, it's all in private, right? And so the older I get, I don't need the private apologies and the private shows of solidarity. Because if you can't publicly stand with me, then let's sever this thing, or I can. There's a way in which I understand. It's levels to this. I have acquaintances. There are folks, who I'm going to consider friends, and so on and so forth. But it's worth us understanding through and through who we're trying to build within and among, these political alliances along this spectrum, if you will. So I think sometimes I think about Lord's move was to, okay, let me see also, or at least it revealed to her where other folks stand or stood, shall I say.
Yeah. Hmm. I just love the way she did it, and I'm sure when she wrote it, she knew, well, the eyes of history will be on this. And how I say it, how I correct my white sister with love will probably need to be emulated later on by other academics who are coming up in her footsteps. So she just showed how you can do it with class. And she did. And how people have responded to it later on one side or the other. The fact of the matter is, you appropriated, you culturally appropriated someone's words and images to suit your own message, your need. And as I watched the clip of Mary Daly, reading from her book, and when she got to that part about the African genital mutilation, and the gasps in the audience. I'm like, where were you? I'm like, yeah, how come y'all don't know? You don't know about this, okay? You claim to be so concerned about women's issues all over the world, but that's not, in your radar. And it takes this woman to bring it to you, but it's in her words and not in the words of the victims, the women from their lips. And I think that's also echoed um, in Morales' piece, where let me tell you about my life.
Mhm.
Don't come at me with your myths and think you know me. And then don't ask me to give you words. Read about it and find it yourself. Metabolize the information for yourself. And then maybe we can have a conversation on and get to the same place.
Right.
So I think it's a lot about not hearing. I mean, well, you hear, but you don't listen, right? What's the difference between hearing something and then really listening? And I
Mhm.
think that's a lot of what was going on. Not uh, the fear of, I'm going to lose something if I really try to understand where you're coming from and how you feel about the experiences that you've had and are still having. So,
Right.
how does it hurt me to learn how to empathize with where you sit, with your
Mhm.
view from your part of the ballpark? Right,
Mhm.
Michelle?
Mhm.
Right. I
Yeah.
agree. And I want to add too, it is, I think too, it's a master class for all of us and like how we consider or how do we value? In what ways do we show that we value or we're devaluing other folks' the epistemologies, the knowledges that other people uh, present with, they bring, right? And even as women, because here's what I understand. I understand that, or from Lord's positionality, that even though those white women were the ones she had to call out a lot of times, when you go into the institutions that Lord was working in, um, she found herself, either Black studies sometimes, traditional, it's English, and then a lot of folks in Lord in the tradition of Lord would be in women's and gender studies program. A lot of times, traditional English department and women and gender studies, white women really do have, the power. They have the positions of power in those programs. And so no matter how hard we try or we're trying to kind of change that, I guess it's a mindset because we're the institutions are not responding as they should because you have to say, well, how is it that this demographic can hold these positions of power for so long? You know, there's no
Mhm.
changing of the guards, if you will. Um, and so these Black women and other women of color have had to find ways to work alongside these White women. I'm not trying to say it was not contentious, right? I can, I yeah, not saying that the laboring was not contentious, but it's so what happens, and I guess what I'm really trying to communicate here is that I would like to see the day where if we're not given an equitable seat at the table, then we can get up and walk away from the whole damn table. I'm good. I'm done. Um, and so because that can't keep being, it's so interesting, Michelle. You were saying you're 21 when this book is published, right? And then I'm 3 years old when this book is published. And so I'm thinking about, but I'm in my coming of age, I understand that the institutions have not changed. That these are the fights that they are discussing, in this book. Folks are still fighting those battles. And we're well into the 21st century. So what do you do? Because I understand that some people will say, well, why do we have to leave? Why can't, we need to stand our ground. I, for me, I think that's, what I would, like to advocate that if it's not served, if, if the seat at the table, if a seat at the table is coming and I've got to wrestle and fight and through all of this. I don't need to be there. Everything, as Terry McMillan was saying on Twitter, not the first person to say it, but everything ain't for everybody. I'm not for those battles. No.
Yeah, well, yeah, me either. I mean, but that's why I was kind of giving my little history, and and why I think that message of when and where I enter um, is so important, because it does matter, the historical moment that you come into as a young adult. Things do change in a back and forth sort of way. Um, and so the reason I'm always talking about the long-term plan is because it just seems a no-brainer to me that we should be learning lessons at each step along the way and not doing the exact same thing, not making the same mistakes. We may make new mistakes, but let them be new mistakes. Um, did y'all see? Did y'all see that woman? I don't know her name. Oh God. She was at the end of last week with John Oliver. He closed his show with her. It's a Black woman. I shared her video, I think today or yesterday on Twitter. And she's giving like this whole history, this whole history lesson of Blacks in America, and she's being pretty cool about it. And then she gets down to the end and she starts cussing Geo.
And I felt her.
And I felt her. Yeah, and but that's the thing, that we have to keep that vision in our head, that memory in our head of what we've already done, and how this time we're going to build on that. We're going to do something a little bit different. We're not going to fall for the same okey doke.
Exactly.